Welcome to the Adoption Journey podcast. It's your host, Tarsha Smith, and I am very excited today to have the founder of the Birth Parent Finder, Mr. Jay Rosenzweig. Hey, Jay.
Thanks, Tarsha, and thank you for pronouncing my last name correctly.
Because I practiced. So I'm going to give in a nutshell, but I would love for you to go more into detail because I am sure there are some adoptees in this community that could use your help. But he is the person that you want to go to if you are looking for your birth parents and your birth family. He has an extensive career in doing this, some of the most amazing stories, and he's even helped a few celebrities. So please let the people know what the Birth Parent Finder is, first of all.
Well, the website is birthparentfinder.com, and it was formed in 2006 as a branch of my private investigation company based in Los Angeles, which was JR Investigations. I still do PI work, but not as much as I used to because Birth Parent Finder keeps me very busy.
I'm sure.
And I started it on a fluke because I've located birth parents before, but not in bulk.
Okay.
And in the early 2000s, my niece, she was adopted out of Los Angeles. She's Black, and my brother-in-law and his wife at the time adopted her at birth, and I was at her house, and she was on her computer, and I said, "Maggie, what are you doing?" She was, "I'm looking for my birth mother." And I said, "I think you're going about this wrong. Let me take over your computer." And I go, "Do you have her name?" She goes, "Yes, but it's very common." And I said, "Kind of like your case."
Yeah.
So I said, "Don't worry." I said, where does she live in Los Angeles?" She goes, "Inglewood." I go, "Fine, I'll do her name, Inglewood." And then I go, "Where do you think she lives now?" She goes, "I think she lives right outside of DC in Maryland." I said, "No problem. How old is she?" She goes, "She's supposedly this age." I go, "Boom, there's your birth mother." That took 5 minutes. She goes, "You're kidding me." I go, "No." So fast forward, got a hold of them. She got a hold of them on her own, which was fine. She was an adult, and everything worked out. We had a reunion at my brother-in-law's house, and a few years later, Maggie got married, and I met her entire birth family. So
That's
Maggie
an amazing
goes,
story.
right. So Maggie goes to me. She goes, "You're really good at doing this. Why don't you have a company that specifically locates birth relatives or birth parents?" So I found the domain name Birth Parent Finder, and the rest is history.
Wow. That was really a fluke. And
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that her story ended up like a really good story. How often does that happen? Are they all good? Well, I know they're not all good stories, but is it like half and half or?
That's really a good question because I get asked it all the time. I don't like putting a percentage on it, but really, it's about what the adoptee's expectations are.
Mm,
What is your expectation? Do you just want medical history? Do you want a reunion? If you just want medical history, we can get that. If you want to know who they are, if you want pictures, we can get that. But there's a lot of adoptees that say, yes, I want to know who my birth family is and I want to meet them. So that's probably 75% of the time.
okay.
And that sounds like a lot, but for us, it's not because we have so many cases.
Right.
And I remember it sticks with me, those other 25% that don't want any part of it. And my job is really to connect families. And do I feel if I don't connect them, it's a failure? Well, no, it's really about what your expectations are and reality. I mean, a lot of these times, you'll have cases where we reach out to let's say a half brother, and that half brother has 15 other siblings born out of wedlock. Why would that person want anything to do with my client? And I get it. I totally get it. Because it brings up sore wounds. And it's like my father and my mother had a lot of kids. I didn't want any part of this. But my job specifically is to get them that information that may give them closure, like the health history. What do they look like? What were the circumstances of the adoption? And that's, if I can get that for my client, I've done my job.
Right. So I know some adoptees are scared to take this reunification journey. What would you say to someone that's afraid to to take the leap? What would your advice be to them?
Well, first thing I would say, what are you afraid of? How was your upbringing? That's really important too. If I
Why
don't think,
why why is that important?
well, if they had a lousy upbringing and have a lot of animosity toward their adopted parents, then they'll have animosity toward their birth family or their birth mother. It
Mhm.
happens a lot. I don't want to take a case where someone has ill feelings toward their birth mother. I won't take it. They're not ready. You have to be ready for this journey. And being ready is I'm ready for anything. I'm ready for finding out who they are, who they were, knowing what they look like, knowing my medical history, and I'm also ready to be. I don't like using the word rejected because how could you be rejected when you weren't accepted in the first place? Think about it. You weren't. When I'm saying accepted, I mean they don't know you. They don't know you. They're placing you up for adoption and putting you. Well, sometimes you don't have a choice. You're in a home with great people. That is your birth family. And however, if let's say, I usually don't talk about this. It happens once in a while. Let's say you were adopted and then given up again. That's the rejection. That's a horrible feeling. That doesn't happen often, but it does.
It does
And
happen.
usually those clients are not in a good place. But don't think of it as rejection because you weren't rejected. You were placed in a loving home. And also, people don't like to talk about abortion. I always tell clients, I say, look, your birth mother gave you life. She did the best thing for you. She gave you a life. You have a good life? The answer is yes. You have a bad life? If your answer is yes, then you know what? I don't think I want to work with you. But I will take your case to give you medical history. And I don't think if you have a bad life and you want to meet your birth family to get a new family, that's really not a good idea. And I'm realistic, and clients understand where I'm coming from. I want to know where they're coming from. Um, and usually clients usually agree with what I'm telling them, but it's really about what they want.
So, do you, and just so that the listeners are clear, because so you can find a birth family and just give the client just medical history, and then they can walk away and be done.
If that's
It
what
can
they
be
want, yes.
that
And
simple.
it's interesting you brought that up because I have a client right now that case is going to go public. It's a high profile one. It's a high profile one that's going to probably either be a documentary, make the news, or we're going to do something with it because it's big. It involves big time Hollywood 30 years ago and
Okay.
even more than 30 years ago. And she just wants one thing, my client: health history. That's it. Nothing else. We've confirmed the birth parents, they're both alive, and they're not talking. They're not talking. Their kids aren't talking, and they. She doesn't have any other kids, but he does. A ton of kids. They won't even get back to me, and the DNA is very clear. She is definitely the daughter of both of these people, and they're not cooperating. And this case has been open since January. She only wants one thing. She doesn't want a reunion unless they want one. She wants her medical history. That's what she went into this with. She knew generally who her birth parents were before, but she hired my company to verify it, reach out to the family, explain the situation, let her know she means no harm. She's not going to pursue anything. She doesn't want their money. She's well off. She just wants this health history for herself, her kids, and her grandkids. She has grandkids. How hard is that? Seriously, how hard is that? She just wants that. So in that particular case, that's all we're getting for her. That's all she wants. And like I said, this case is still open. And I just want to close. It's not my fault. She's not mad at me because I've
Right.
identified and I've given her some additional information about her birth father. That's chilling. I'm not going to talk about it today because you'll find out about it eventually. But it's so chilling that this birth father was. We're going to call him the Harvey Weinstein of his day.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the medical history.
There you go.
And just to let any adopt, or excuse me, any birth parents that I'm listening to, and I know that you and I talked and you shared with me that now it's mandatory. But when I was placed for adoption in 1975, I guess it wasn't mandatory because I didn't have medical history. I grew up going to the doctors, especially as I got a little older, and it says, what's your medical history? I didn't know. I now know, at least my maternal side, I can fill out that information. I actually just went to the doctors based on some information that I recently found out. And grandchildren as well. It's so important. And I don't know,
It
and it's
is.
very weird to go through life without it. And
That's the
so,
key. That's
yeah.
what most people want. And I'll give that. You call me up and say, hey, that's all I want. I don't need to know anything else.
So you'll give medical information. And if they want a reunification, you'll even make sure that happens too.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know, let the people know how long you've been doing this.
So I'm going to give my age, basically. So I,
Uh-oh.
I started as a private investigator in 1982. I've been doing all kinds of investigation work. Got my license in 1990. Got involved with the California Association of Licensed Investigators. Was on their board for many years. I was their president. I was their chairman of the board. And then I took a break, opened Birth Parent Finder. And then 5 years ago, I got back on their board and became chairman again.
Okay.
So I'm one of the few people in that association that does birth parent finding.
Birth Parent
Right.
Finder.
And we're actually having a conference coming up at the end of this month in Sonoma. And Birth Parent Finder is going to have a booth because a lot of PIs, this is not what they do. They call me and say, hey, I have a client who's looking for their birth family. Can you help them? And I won't do subcontract work for that. I will take the case directly because they need to work with me.
And I'm glad that you exist because I have heard people say, I want to find a PI so I can find my birth family. I actually had a guest not too long ago say just that on the podcast. And I am actually going to refer her to you now instead and tell her you don't have to get the PI because she's still looking and wants to find she is aware that her birth father is deceased, but she wants to find his family. And so I just need to let her know that, this is what you do.
Right. And
Um,
also, I'm sorry, the everyone, and I told you this, everyone should take a DNA test. And we prefer Ancestry first because more people test with that company.
and what's so special about Ancestry versus the other ones? Because I had this question myself because I have not taken a DNA test yet,
It's
but I'm
just
getting
their
ready to.
database is bigger than the other companies. They're very well known. I mean, the other companies are good too. 23andMe is a very good company, but more people test with Ancestry.
Okay. Now let me ask you this. Now, say I test with Ancestry, but my birth family tested with 23andMe. Will you not find anything? Do you have to test it with the same company?
Well, there could be people on both, but we also upload it to GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA, other companies, and they kind of
Okay.
overlap sometimes. But yes, I would say Ancestry is the first choice.
The first choice. Okay, because that was my personal question when I was thinking about doing this, because I still need to, I would still like to find my paternal side. If you follow the podcast, you know I have found my maternal side. So um, that was the question. Um, and another question that I think you should share, because I want people to know how good you are and how credible you are. I know there was a high profile case in LA with a newscaster there that won you a lot of awards. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So that was 2013. I get a phone call from a like an intern from KTLA Channel 5 saying, "Hey, look, we know you locate birth parents. We're going to do a story about our morning news anchor Chris Schaubel in his search for his birth family. He was adopted in Florida in the early 1970s." And I said, "Sure." So they said, "Will you be on TV quite often? And we're going to run this story until the case is solved." So they brought me into the studio, and I talked about me and how I work and how difficult this case might be. And it took 6 months to solve that case.
Mm.
6 months.
Now, is
And
that a long time
yes,
for you?
it,
Okay.
it was, well, it was reasonable amount of time because we had nothing to go on whatsoever. Didn't know
Okay.
anything about his birth family. He was able to get his non-ID because he requested it. And then not many people know this. that some investigator in Florida said, "Hey, you could pay me $1,000. I'll break into the records room and get you that information." It's like, why? Why would I go through life knowing that I did something illegal like that? It's
Right.
like, no. It's like, no. So what I did was I contacted this because we weren't going anywhere with this. DNA wasn't big back then, and Ancestry came in and found no relatives of anything we can put together. So I contacted the state of Florida. They have an adoption unit, and that's how we got his non-ID. And I said, can we take this one step further? Is there any way we can petition the court to have his records open to give the birth mother's name? And she goes, I tell you what, you back off, me. And though she was right, she goes, and I'll work with your client. Normally, this is normally not done. Basically, I tell you, sorry, we'll get this done, and we'll put this on TV, and we'll get the magistrate, and we'll ask the magistrate if he would open the records based on medical history. Magistrate came on. By the way, this didn't cost him a lot of money. It cost him maybe $100 in fees. That's it. Magistrate came on and said, Mr. Schaubel, I see no reason why we can't open your records and let you know who your birth mother is. Time went by, a couple months. They reached out to the birth mother. By the way, they gave me the birth father's information. I was able to find his brother, reunited with his brother. And then they reached out to the birth mother, and she goes, oh my God, I'd love to meet my son. She lived in Texas. They met. It was filmed. And my business went up tremendously because of it. And that's the story that got Birth Parent Finder to the next level. Chris and I are very close friends to this day. And by the way, it's a biracial adoption in 1971 in Florida, and it took him a while to get adopted because he was adopted by a white family out of Colorado. And by the way, originally they would not let him be adopted by a white family. They said that's unacceptable. I didn't know that initially, but
Yeah,
it's like,
I just had a guest on, and he in the 70s, and his mom had to fight as well because he's black and they're white.
and it's like, really? And Chris had the greatest childhood, adopted by the best people, and he had no reason to find his birth family other than health history and curiosity. But it was a really nice news story. It was nominated for an Emmy, nominated for a couple of news awards in LA. I got to go to the shows. I got to go on stage when the awards were presented. Now, I don't get the award because I didn't work for the news station. But
Right.
later on, based on my work with adoptees, with birth mothers, and by the way, I do work with a lot of birth mothers. That's another thing. And we'll get into that in a minute if you have time.
Yes.
Um, um, the California Association of Licensed Investigators gave me their Distinguished Achievement Award for my efforts in investigation, community service, and support of the industry. It's a huge award that's not given out every year. So I got that during COVID on Zoom because they couldn't have the conference,
couldn't have it in
that
person.
presentation in person. So it was a very big honor for me to get that award, and it was based on a lot of my work with Birth Parent Finder and also with the association.
So tell me, what services would you offer a birth mother?
We probably, I would say less than 20% of our cases come from birth mothers or birth fathers looking for a child that's out there. And I love working with birth mothers because 90% of the time the child is going to want a reunion because they don't know how to find their birth mother. It's easier working with a birth mother because she has their date of birth, where they were born, and possibly the names of the adopted parents. And the adoptees aren't going to get that information.
You know, it never occurred to me that the birth parents would go look, but I guess that's, yeah. Now, have you ever done a case where the adoptee was like, yeah, no, I'm good?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I've had a few of them. And you can go back and look at our social media and look at one case, and it still bothers me. I was working with a birth mother who, my job was to connect the birth mother with the adoptee. These were twins that were separated at birth. The birth mother kept one of the twins. My job was to bring everyone together. By the way, she never told her daughter that she was a twin, that she had another child. This was, I think they were 20 at the time. So she still didn't know. So my job was to facilitate this reunion and make sure that everything would go well with the adoptee and the daughter that she kept, and also her mother. The grandmother didn't know either. Everything went beautifully, and everything went as I said it would be. Everything. And by the way, you can watch that series. It's on my YouTube page. It's on my IMDb page. It was called A Birth Mother Story. We put a 5-minute sizzle reel together, and the story is not complete. It's to be continued because the adoptee didn't want this to be continued. She wouldn't sign a media release. And I did this for her pro bono, believe it or not. She was the one who wanted me to reach out to the birth mother. And the birth mother and I are very close friends. I'm very close friends with her husband and the daughter that wasn't adopted. I actually went to Indiana 2 years ago and filmed her story. And it was beautiful, but the adoptee just was bitter that the birth mother rejected her. And my job was to show that she really wasn't rejected and that she has a better life now, because the birth mother didn't know which child would be placed for adoption. And I even interviewed the doctor who delivered the twins, and he just said, "Well, we just it was
Well,
baby number
now
2
I'm
was."
gonna have to go and watch because I'm curious why you would keep one twin and give the other one up for adoption.
It's controversial, and I got the answer to that. And she was not in the right state of mind. She had no financial resources. She only wanted one child, and somehow she had twins. And she wanted to give the second child a better life, a life that she could give one child. She could not give 2 children that same life.
Hmm.
Whether that I don't know if that would have been true or not. Most likely it would have been, because she would have been her husband worked 4 jobs to support her and her daughter.
Now,
Um,
did she not have another, like a relative that possibly could have taken the twin?
she didn't want to do that because her mother was kind of controlling. She didn't want that to happen. She wanted to do things on her own. It's very controversial. And look, I don't judge
Decision.
people. I don't judge people. Didn't
Absolutely.
I didn't judge the birth mother. I'm not going to say what she did was right or wrong. It was her decision and her husband's. And the bottom line is the adoptee was told a lot of things about the birth mother and her supposed selfishness. And we work with a psychologist on this who was very, very astute and said great things, that the birth mother, I'm sorry, the adopted mother should not have said horrible things about the birth mother and support the birth mother in the birth mother's decision, because the birth mother did pick that family. And obviously that was a good family for her to go to. And the birth mother made a decision to put her with a family that liked horses, that was religious, and she got all that. She was a champion rider. By the way, both girls are champion horse riders, and both of them work as dog groomers. How do you like that? And they're pretty much identical twins, but
Twin thing is
yeah, it happens a lot. We've had cases where
yeah.
where everyone in the adopted family, I'm sorry, everyone in the birth family is in the medical field, nurses, doctors, and our client was a nurse.
So I have one more question to ask you before we
Sure.
wrap it up here.
Sure.
I'm curious to know how common closed adoptions are today, because it seems like, and I could be wrong, during my time, I was born in the 70s, it was more everything seemed to be more closed versus now open. Is that true?
Well, it depends what state you're in, but more states are
Mm,
opening their records. And I honestly think that most adoptions today are not closed because of
okay.
DNA. Anyone, even an infant, could take a DNA test.
Right.
You're not supposed to, but you can do it,
You could do it.
and it's going to show your family. So there's 0 point for a closed adoption. Now, if it's in another country, that's a different story. We do take cases in certain countries, and we've solved them, but most people in other countries don't take DNA tests, and these adoptions are closed. But you have to go in as an adopted parent. You have to go in knowing that more than likely your child that you adopted is never going to find their birth family. You have to understand that.
If it's out of the country.
Right.
Okay.
And Russia's a tough one. Russia right now, I think in the last 20 years, you couldn't adopt the child out of Russia because of
Yeah.
certain things that happened. But
Yeah.
and we found birth mothers in South America, Mexico. We have a birth father we found in Mexico. It's on my. Did I post it? You know what? Sometimes some I haven't posted because I'm saving them. like you do too. You save some of these stories.
I do.
Um, it's on there. It's Sharon Peacock, and her name's on there. It's fine. It's on our YouTube channel, and it's a story about finding her. We found her father in Mexico, and like your story, we used Facebook. Facebook was huge because his name was Luis, something very common name, and based on DNA, we found some of the DNA relatives who are second and third cousins. So what we did was we saw those people in Mexico with those last names and their first names. They're on Facebook. So we looked at their relatives and we found a Luis, whatever his last name was, and we had a picture of the birth father from 1971 or whatever year it was, and we compared it to this guy's picture. It was the same guy. Hard
Wow.
part was getting a hold of him and people believing. You can't message people on Facebook unless you're friends with them. They may never see your. You know how that works.
They may
They may
never
never
see
see your.
it. Right. They may never see it.
After 2 months of reaching out, I told my client, "Go ahead." And I usually tell my clients, "Don't reach out on your own. Let us do it." Her and I together reached out to every single person on Facebook, and his sister finally responded. And the picture we had of him was with his sister. And she goes, "Oh my God, where did you get this picture?" She goes, "From my mom." And then they're meeting next month in Mexico.
That's
I would have gone, but it's a bad time for me to go. It's a heck of a story. And by the way, she's cousins with. You ever see that documentary, Three Identical Strangers?
I do
It's on
not see.
it's on Netflix. It's about triplets that were separated at birth for an experiment,
I'm gonna have to go look
and
at
one
that.
of them committed suicide in his 30s. She was relatives with the one that committed suicide. So it's all
Wow.
connected, but it's a heck of a story. And we've had these stories. We just
Yeah,
sometimes
you
can't.
have got some incredible stories. We could talk to him for hours because he's been doing this a long time and the stories. And so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. I thank you so much for being on the Adoption Journey podcast. And just one more time, please let the people know how to find you if they want to use your services.
It's really simple. Our website is birthparentfinder.com, and our social media is at birthparentfinder. We're on all social media.